Welcome to another episode of the Superbold Podcast. I am excited today to talk with Paul Vigario, who's the founder and CEO of SurfCT. And we're going to dig into what that business does, but it is essentially the premier business in dentistry for creating a fully integrated dental practice that realizes your vision. I think that sums it up as accurately as I've been capable of doing so far. But Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Fred. I'm honored to be here with you today. It's super exciting.
So I explained what SurfCT is. Take a stab at it. See if you can.
Sure. Well, it's multifaceted, right? It's multifaceted. Yeah. We started as, an IT department for a private practice, but having done that for 20 years and building over 12,000 practices, we've really learned how to help entrepreneurial doctors realize their vision. We have so much experience in doing this. And when things are led by technology in 2023, it's really amazing the exponential outcomes that come out of that, right? And I sometimes give this analogy. You could be the best limousine car driver or black car driver there is. If Uber comes out, you end up working for Uber and using Uber, right? So we're living in a world where everything is technology driven. And when you have the experience and wisdom to take that and put it into a system that can help the doctor realize their vision, it's very, very powerful. So at the end of the day, we help doctors achieve more and elevate their practices and do more of whatever it is that they love. So it's very, very rewarding.
Yeah. And I think what you do is you incorporate the design of the practice and the technology that the dentist or dentists like to use or want to incorporate it into their practice. You integrate all of that, but you start first with their vision. And so how does that go? When you approach a dentist and say, hold on, I need to know your vision before we make a plan here, what happens?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because sometimes you'll ask a dentist that and they're not even sure, or they have an idea of where they want to go. But when you start showing them what's possible, that really starts to expand wider and deeper and more enriched. It's more enriched vision. And so it's really amazing to start with the end in mind. When I was a little kid, I used to do these mazes in the newspaper. My parents would get the newspaper and I would start at the end of the maze, and it was so much easier to get out than it would be to start at the beginning and hit like every single dead end. So when we start to show them what's possible, their minds expand, possibilities expand. And if we know where we're going, then we can design a system to get there. And when you design the space and the technology together, you can start to create really amazing experiences for the doctor, for the team, for the patients, and ultimately for the brand that will carry that vision forward. So starting with that end in mind, and that little maze analogy that I gave as a kid in the newspaper, that really helps us make sure that everything we're doing sequentially is helping the doctor get to where they want to get. And it's super fun to do that.
Yeah, I can imagine it is when you present a possibility that they didn't see and then you help them realize it. That can be very exciting. And I know many of the dentists that you've created practices with, and I think that there's a hesitance that a lot of doctors have to really push those boundaries. It feels unsafe for them to not do the standard thing unless they see that somebody else has done it, and then they realize what's possible. And so you have some doctors who've done some pretty wild things over the years. Give me an example of somebody who just took this whole idea of connecting everything to their vision and going crazy with it.
Sure. So, we started, years ago before COVID, asking the question, why have a waiting room at all? Like, why do that? And then we started to explore areas of friction within the practice, and the front desk was another area, right? I mean, it's literally set up, in the traditional sense, it's set up for failure. You're on the phone talking to the insurance company, they put you on hold for 30 minutes. Somebody walks in the door, and you're supposed to greet them. And the minute they walk in the door, the insurance people pick up and they're ready to help you. So it's, I tell doctors, spend 20 minutes at your front desk and realize that they're literally in survival mode, and it's just designed that way. So even before COVID, we started exploring building practices without a front desk, no front desk. And in fact, no waiting room, perhaps a lounge, but just frictionless automation in that initial experience. And it was a wild concept. We did it once for a doctor, and I had her husband call me, and she was an endodontist, he was an oral surgeon, and he said, what the heck do you think you're doing? And I said, no, you gotta trust that process. Like, no, this is not how it's been done. But it was an interesting conversation we had, because I said, your wife wants to be extraordinary. She wants to take things to an entirely new level. And how can we do that if we're thinking within a box of ordinary, right? If every dental practice is built exactly the same, well, how do you expect to get different types of results? So for the doctors that have pushed these boundaries with us, and then we've started connecting things internally, really just, it's been amazing what's happened. Whether it's a single practice that just starts to work in tremendous ways, and in ways that the practice starts to work for you, that's a major win, because now as a doctor, you're not in the practice stuck working in it. The practice is working for you. Or in some cases, I have these two doctors, they're 33 years old. They're going on to their fourth location at the age of 33. And there's a plan to open up 50 practices within the next 5 years. And it's working. It's working. We had a couple meetings last night with a couple doctors that were going to be expanding this brand. So if you could ultimately take what's a local coffee shop and generate and create a system that makes it operate like a Starbucks, well, then just like Starbucks, it can go wildfire. But that's not necessarily what we're saying. It's also a matter of being authentic and who you are. So if you just want your practice to start working for you, this is a great starting point. If we can automate your practice to the point where it's turnkey and it's easy and it's cash flowing in extraordinary ways, and patients are happy and the team is happy, and you find yourself with less and less to do, that's a major victory for us. And then what you do with that time is up to you. Some doctors get really entrepreneurial, and others are just happy to be, a mom or dad and just live life. And there's nothing wrong with any of it. And one of the big things that we tell our clients is it's very important that we remain authentic, because this is a powerful technology, and we want to make sure we're not building like a very strong bridge to nowhere. We want to build bridges that are going to lead you to your final destination. And thus why we start with the end in mind, because it's very powerful stuff.
And when you talk about vision, it's not just what kind of practice do I want to have. It's like, let's talk about the life you want to have. The practice is only one element in it. Like you say, if being a dad is important to you, if being running a charitable organization on the side is important to you, you need to know all of it. It all has to fit, because there's only so much time to do things. You can't say, oh, well, I want to only work 2 days a week and spend a lot of time with my kids, but I want 50 practices in 2 years. You say, well, you're going to be kind of busy doing that for the next 2 or 3 years. So maybe it's 2 practices, maybe it's 3 practices, or we got to build a heck of a team, and you're not going to make a lot of money for a while. And they have to be okay with that. So once you have a scope of how far you believe you can get, I think that people start to say, oh yeah, it is important. Making money is important, but this is that. Because it breaks my heart when I see people work so hard to achieve their business dream, and the rest of their life crumbles because of it. Because I think that that's not a success.
Right. And so we have this saying at SurfCT. It's actually we've trademarked it. It's everything is connected. And a lot of people, when they first see that, they think of the technology. Oh yeah, they connect everything. And that's definitely true, but it's beyond that. It's your life, it's your family, it's what you're trying to achieve, it's your goals. And what you just mentioned, which, having done 12,000 practices, I've studied where people go so far after, their goals that the rest of their life crumbles. That's a goal oriented mindset. And doctors are smart. I mean, they're super smart. They didn't become doctors by accident. So they could achieve their dreams with that mindset, but it's often like a straitjacket mindset. It's somewhat fleeting because you work so hard to become a doctor. You become a doctor, now what? And then you do residency, and then you finish that, and now what? And it's just like goal after goal. But fast forward 20 years of your life goes by, and you look back, and what is success? I mean, maybe you've made a lot of money, but there's been other areas of your life that have fallen apart. And so the really fun part about what we're doing here is we're taking that goal-oriented mindset and we're putting it into a system, right? We're putting it into a system. We're building a system that can help move those goals forward for the doctor when they're not there, and it creates scalability. And so somebody dreamt, someone thought of a Starbucks, on a napkin in a meeting in a boardroom, but ultimately that got put into a system that carried that vision out. And that's one of the missing things that we've seen in a lot of practices. Doctors are really excited to own a practice. They'll build a practice, and before they know it, they're in it working towards their goals. But there's not a systematic approach to doing that.
Yeah, and Starbucks is a great example because I remember when they were really rolling, they were opening a Starbucks every 3 days, which means they knew exactly they could walk into any space and turn it into a Starbucks, and there was it just got done, and it got done incredibly quickly, and then they knew how to train people and all of it. It was all systems, but the vision was, we want to give people a comfortable place to hang out and have a luxurious cup of coffee that they'll pay 3 times as much for gladly.
Yeah. And that's there's a whole methodology to that. So there's the vision, there's the design of the Starbucks, there's the technology that goes into it, there's the treatment philosophy or the company philosophy, and then there's the brand. And when you create alignment between the vision, the design, the technology, the treatment philosophy, and the brand, you can create a brand that powers itself. I mean, we've all seen people not only pay 300% more for a cup of coffee, but then they take a picture with the cup of coffee and they post it online, and they're promoting the brand, right? They're promoting the brand. And it's a real digital journey and digital strategy to how you got there. So when we can do that for doctors, we can take a doctor that was practicing in New York, and they could open up halfway around the world and then in every major city. That's super fun if that's their vision. At the same time, I've met doctors who want to be a better mom or better dad or spend more time at home. And it's fun to get them to be able to pull away from the chair and still watch the practice grow. So it's really a matter of creating alignment. And instead of being so goal oriented, where we're like in a straitjacket just trying to get to that goal, because I have zero doubt that doctors can achieve their goals, zero doubt about that. It's how can we take those goals and systematize them so that your team, your practice, your brand, everything about your business is rowing in the same direction, in alignment, and working towards those goals. A lot of times when a doctor will talk to someone about the industry, they get a very cookie cutter type of approach. We are very different. We think outside the box, we push the envelope. But in those initial meetings, we're really trying to get the doctors to just open up and see what they want. Ultimately, we got to be authentic, but authentic doesn't mean let's just hit copy paste on the way the last 10,000 practices were built and build another one exactly like it. You're going to get the same results. So we want to go from ordinary to extraordinary and really think outside the box and do that together with the doctors to figure out authentically, what they want for their entire life and how we get there.
Now, I like to talk about boldness and the impact that can have on your life. Have you encountered doctors that hesitated? Because using you is a bold move, because it's an investment. You're not the cheapest way to open a practice, nor are you striving to be that. Because there are people who can do that, and basically you are you're opening a 7-Eleven sort of approach.
Yeah.
And there's a need for those kind of practices too, but you're specialized. But have you seen doctors hesitate to make this leap, and over the course of your career? I imagine you've seen some of those, and are you able to take them through that, or do you just say, that what do you say?
Yeah, so we like to show them what's possible. And a lot of times when you start to show people what's possible and you show people the real life success stories, I have a doctor right now in Toronto, and Canada is, pretty socialist, and it's very insurance driven. And, the doctor is generating $7 million in revenue from one chair and makes it home for dinner every day with his family. That's the goal. The goal isn't to build anything more. And 7 million out of one chair is an amazing success story. So when we show people these different success stories, whether it's being home by 5 for dinner, or becoming an entrepreneurial doctor and expanding beyond your wildest dreams, or anywhere in the middle, they tend to resonate towards one of them. And that's an exciting thing. At the end of the day, though, you got to take that boldness leap. And when I read your book, I fell in love with the book. It's done amazing things for doctors that I've recommended it to. In fact, when I talk to a doctor and they start to resonate and they want to move in that direction, but there's something holding them back, I'll often send them a copy of your book. I'll say, hey, read this book. And it's more because boldness is so amazing. And I've always been confident. And when I read your book, I realized there's a difference between confidence and boldness, right? So I deal with a lot of confident doctors, but you're right. It takes a certain level of boldness to build a practice without a front desk, to build a practice without a waiting room. The amount of success stories that we have, it's unrefutable. It's unrefutable. So a lot of times when we show doctors this, we find that they'll resonate towards one. But at the end of the day, it does take a certain level of boldness to move forward with it.
All right, so let's talk about you personally. What was a bold move you made in your life that changed the course of it? And maybe let's see if there's a couple of times you hesitated and missed something wonderful in your life, or that could have affected the course of your life. You got a pretty good life, so. So let's start with a bold move you made maybe early on in your life that was the shift.
Sure. I was 20 years old, and we had, come up with the idea for the company at the University of Connecticut, and the school loved it and they wanted to back it up and fund it. And I also had an awesome opportunity to go work in Germany at the time. So I was actually, working in Munich, Germany, making 6 figures, at the age of, 20, 21, very early. And my parents were wildly proud. And after being in a foreign country for about a month, and, I just wasn't happy. And I remember telling my parents, I said, this is a great opportunity. I want to launch my business. And my dad, super educated, and, he's an engineer. And he's like, no, Paul, you've got a great job in Germany. Don't give this up. And my mother, who raised us and didn't have the same opportunities to go to college, she said, Paul, you got to do this. Like, you're 20 years old. Like, this is it. Like, you got to do this. And so she was bold. And I thank her for that, because, man, that was a bold move to say, hey, you know what? Thanks for this amazing opportunity. I'm going back to the States and I'm launching my business. And I was in my college dorm when it was launched. And then I moved back into the summer, and I'll never forget. My mom told me, she said, you better wake up tomorrow at 6 a.m. And I said, why am I waking up at 6? She goes, because your dad's pretty pissed that you don't have a real job. And I said, all right. And I got up at 6. I didn't want to upset him, and started, working. Right. But having that courage to start your business, or having that courage as a doctor to start your practice, that is one of the boldest things I think anyone can do, because at the end of the day, that's it. There's no safety rope. There's no HR department in the beginning. Payroll is you. So I think that was one of my boldest moves, and the one that paid off the most. And I encourage young doctors to take that step if they want to. And I knew that I wanted more for my life. I knew that I wanted extraordinary, and I knew that an ordinary job wasn't going to get me there. So.
Yeah, well, and that was a bold move because that was good money, and and your dad's coming from a world like if you get a good paying job, you're set for life. You hang on to that. That's the way my dad was too, and my mom was more like your mom, is like take a shot, try, take a risk, because it's life is short, and that's kind of the premise that I put out there is like you're going to run out the clock here, and you're in the game of life, but you don't know how long you're going to get to play. So you better be putting your best game out there, and trying stuff and not thinking you'll get to stuff. I think the beauty of you being young enough is, and it was the same thing with me, is when I started 800 Dentist, I didn't have that far to fall. So
Yeah,
if I totally failed, it was not that different than the life I had before. I had a decent job in advertising, but I had to take a big swing, and I was encouraged by my mom to do it. And my dad had passed away by then, so he would have been really uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that's the thing. My dad was really uncomfortable, right? And I think you gotta like learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because in that zone of uncomfortableness, that's where the growth happens. And it's actually like baked into us, right? Like think about it. Like we grow a lot during puberty. Well, it's a really uncomfortable part of our life. My daughter's 6. The other day, she starts having some pains. I call the doctor, and he's like, "Oh yeah, those are called growing pains. Like her bones are growing," and so she was uncomfortable. So it's like baked into our universe that when you're uncomfortable, there's some level of growth happening there. But I think boldness is being aware of it. And your book was absolutely tremendous for me, because even though I've taken bold moves in my life, that built up my confidence. But because I didn't understand the difference between confidence and boldness, as I got a little bit older, I was less bold. And I remember after reading your book, my wife turned to me and said, "You're so much more fun." And she didn't know that I was reading her book. She's like, "I don't know what's happened to you in the last week. You're just more fun." And all my business partners were more excited, and life started to open up. So I encourage my young doctors to be bold. But what I love about your book is it really has a very clear distinction between what confidence is, what boldness is, and it allows you to get in action. And it's been tremendous for the doctors that I've given it to. It's been tremendous for our team. I've given it to our team internally. We've had some wild success stories about that. And it's great. It's great. I think boldness is such a great ingredient in life.
Yeah, and I think that what happens when you're confident, especially, and it happens to dentists, they get confident, they've built their expertise, they've built a comfortable practice and cash flow, and that confidence is you're working within your comfort zone. Boldness is working outside of it. Boldness is a willingness to be uncomfortable. And that's what bold people know is like, I don't have to be confident to do this. I can just try it and see what happens. And so many times when you just step in and say, I'm committing to this. I'm going to sign the lease for this new practice. I'm going to ask this woman to marry me, whatever it is. And you don't give yourself a way out. Then all of a sudden the universe says, "Oh, you're ready to play. Okay. I get some swag for you that you weren't expecting, little gifts here and there, and encouragement, and just unexpected, wonderful things happen. And you start to trust that and say, like, this is a whole bunch of people I don't know. I'm going to go try to meet some of them in a room somewhere, in a hotel, at a meeting, whatever. And you just wade in and just start talking to people. You have no expectation, no goal in mind, except to just connect with some people, to learn who they are, what matters to them, what's interesting to them, how their week was, and all of a sudden you'll find the craziest thing I found is that if you talk to somebody long enough, about 50% of the time, you'll find out you both know somebody, the same person. It's crazy how that happens, because I've done it all around the world. And it's like, do you know? Wait a minute, you were here when a friend of mine was there at that time, and it's really it's a definite small world experience. But
No, for sure. And like I always say, everything is connected, right? And so when you become more bold and you become more aware of what boldness is, and you do exactly what you said, you start connecting with people, you find that we are all connected through people, to people. A lot of us have the same dreams and aspirations, and you can learn from each other, which is really, really exciting. So your book has been absolutely phenomenal, and our doctors have taken bold steps, and when you're operating in that and you surround yourself with great people and you develop great systems, it's really, there's a lot of success that comes out of that.
So let's talk about Ian, who worked for you. That I think that's just a great story of self discovery for someone, and also for you reaching into a team member's life and being able to impact them.
Sure. Ian is one of the biggest success stories, from a very measurable. I think there's a lot of success that you can't measure, but from a very measurable standpoint, a huge success story. He had been working for me for years. Um, Nice guy, came in, did his work, did his thing, pretty ordinary, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we were in New York City, and one of my other reps got a little bit sick that day, and Ian stepped in, which was great. And we're in this room with 100 doctors, and I see him over in
Now,
the
so Ian's working in sales.
He works in sales. Yeah.
Okay.
He works in sales, and he was working on inside sales on the phone, talking to people on the phone. And one of our reps gets, sick, and he steps in, and we're in a room with 100 doctors. And I'm like, this is great because we're going to meet a lot of people, and I'm socializing. Everybody's having a great time. And I see Ian in the corner, and he's literally in the corner, and his head is turned to the corner. So I came up to him and said, "Hey, you okay?" And he was almost in tears. I mean, he had his eyes were watery, and I had thought maybe someone passed or something. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, I have major anxiety right now. I talk on the phone. I don't do this." And I'm like, "Why'd you volunteer for this?" And he's like, "I thought I could handle it." And I was like, "Well, you could. You're a professional. You're a great guy." And I just realized that I had to be sensitive in that moment, because where I couldn't relate to that, he was in distress. And it was interesting because on my drive into the city, I was listening to Superbold, which got me primed up for this event. Like, I'd listen to it before I go to events. It's like, yes, let's have some fun. And when we left that evening, the next day I reached out to Ian. I said, "I want you to do yourself a huge favor. I want you to read this book." And all his years of working for me, I had never done that to him. And I said, "I want you to read this book, and please do." And he goes, I will. I didn't tell him anything else. And he read that book, and what happened, I'm going to say almost immediately, but it's definitely still happening. It's a work in progress, just like all of life, is Ian became who he always was. It was always in him. And this guy 3x'd his income, which, is just powerful. He goes from not six figures to well into the six figures. He gains access to all these new resources in life. In fact, we bought Teslas for our executives in the company, and just based on the type of money he was making, he qualified for a brand new Tesla. So he's got a brand new Tesla. He just had his second baby, which he was only going to have one, decided to have another. I mean, his whole life opened up. And I say he was who he always was, because that was inside him. Your book allowed him to just release that and open it up. And I've always known he's an amazing person, but just to see this guy who couldn't be in a room with 100 people, now he grabs the microphone in the room. I mean, he does the intro. People are like, "Paul, who's going to introduce you?" And I'm like, "Well, who wants to?" And Ian's like, "No, I got it. I got it." And he's not even reading from a piece of paper. He just grabs the microphone. It's profound to see what he can do, and there's no cap on what he can achieve. And I know without access to Superbold, whatever story he was telling himself in that corner that was giving him that level of anxiety, that story would have persisted. Because guess what? It persisted for the first 30 years of his life. And almost immediately, he was able to break free. And I say almost immediately because we talk about it. And he says, "Listen, I do work on being bold every single day. I do work on being bold every single day. It's a muscle. You got to exercise it."
And one of the things that you said is so important is that, and a lot of people say, well, I don't want to become somebody else. That's not me. And the reality is, all that's just an excuse for not releasing your full self to the world, not giving yourself permission to have a full life and bring your full self to the world. And that's all he did. He didn't become somebody else. He released the Ian that was trapped inside in a cage of his own making, and and now everybody else gets to experience the full Ian. I mean, that's that. I make that point in the book, but it's so important. Is when you're hesitating, when you're holding back, you're actually depriving the rest of the world of the full you. It's not, you're suffering, but you're also depriving people of your greatness, which we all have in our own way. And it makes me so happy to know how quickly Ian did it, because I know how slowly I did it myself. It took me decades to do what he did in 3 to 6 months. It was, very satisfying. And when I met him, I could, he was just this totally interesting and centered guy who was very happy. It was at a meeting with a whole bunch of new people, and it was one of my most satisfying moments, because I don't meet most of the people who read my book. There's thousands of them out there, but I appreciate you doing that. I mean, that's the other thing is you had changed, because 3 months earlier you probably would have said to him, like, pull it together, man. It's like, this is
Sure. You're right. I mean, I would have played the confidence card and be like, what's wrong with you? I don't have confidence with it. But I realized there was something else going on there. And so your book really, the book, and you said, it took you decades. I could sense that, because when I read the book, I felt like there was decades of wisdom, bottled up right there for the taking. And so it's so powerful, and you could Google anything. And I think Google has knowledge-based stuff, but wisdom, real wisdom that you can apply and you can digest. And so the book, really has made me a lot more empathetic as a person. It's not a book about being cocky. It's not a book about being arrogant. It really creates a higher level of empathy, but also creates this permission to be bold and empathetic and sympathetic, to step up at the right times. And I'll often tell doctors when that doctor in Toronto shares me, like, hey, I generate $7 million out of one chair. Or we take a client who had one practice and now they're at 38 locations and they share their excitement. I'll often turn to them and say, well, you deserve it. You deserve it. I'm really happy for you. And I think that we have to give ourselves that. We deserve the life that we want, and we have to give ourselves permission to step into that life, right? There's nothing great about playing small. You got to play big, but you got to be yourself. So I think Superbold just gives you all of that permission, gives you those guidelines, but it's very important. It creates a level of empathy too, because without me having read that book at that time, I probably would have been like, "What the heck is wrong with you? Pull it together, man." And I think that's how most executives, treat people. It's like, pull it together, and the book really does a deep dive on how we get here and how we lose sight of boldness, right? And it's an amazing book. I recommend it to everybody and anybody, from the highest level to entry level. It's an amazing read. Thank you for being.
Because, like you said, you were a confident person, and you had made plenty of bold moves in your life. But now all of a sudden you read the book and you say, oh, I can actually be systematic about this. Like there's a methodology here to acting boldly that I can just start to apply, and it just expanded you. And you just said, well, I'm going to start chasing the discomfort.
And that systematic approach is almost like what Surf does for doctors, and you've done it with boldness and with confidence. And so we've taken elements of the book and baked it right into our systems. I just had a doctor do a major celebrity the other day. They're working on a major celebrity. They brought it up to me. And I said, well, your office is actually designed to capture that moment because you've got your brand, you've got your logo behind you. And so your assistant can come and ask. And they were like, well, they're coming in tomorrow. What do I do? And I was like, you be bold about it. You be bold about it. And they had read the book. And the minute I said that, they understood. And, they were very polite, and they just asked the celebrity if it was okay to take the picture. And if it wasn't, it'd be no problem. And they were more than happy to. And what that boldness did for the brand on that day and moving forward, it's attracted more A-listers to it, which is great. And it's just, there's something about your book that increases empathy, increases sympathy, and opens up life that is a real gift for anybody who receives the book and who reads it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, because I think sometimes we're afraid to be empathetic. It's like, oh, I'm opening myself up too much. And bold people go like, I'll deal with whatever comes. It could be rejection. It could be, they could be, an emotional vampire. But I'm just gonna be open enough to know that I can be empathetic and deal with it. And somebody may say, oh, you're being too much, or they may just say, like I've done with people. I just recently helped out somebody on the airplane, and it's just, sometimes we hesitate to be kind, and so I got on the airplane, and this was this week. I had an exit row seat, so I had to put both my bags up, but I had checked a bigger bag. So I had a carry-on and a backpack, and plane's jam-packed, full. And they start to say, there's no more overhead space. And this young woman comes on, and I'm right at the door, and the flight attendant says, there's no more overhead for your bag. You're going to check it. And she goes, oh, no, there's medical stuff in this bag. I need it. I can't check this. It can't be in the hold. It can't get cold. It's like, and the flight attendant's like, well, there's no room. And so I just sort of jumped in and said, I can check my other bag, and she can shove it in my space. And she said, really? And I said, yeah, I already got a checked bag. It's not going to slow me down. So I just took my bag down, and she put the bag up, and the flight attendant said, that's one of the nicest things I've seen anybody do in a long time. And it didn't cost me anything. But I chose, but how many times do we sit there and wait for somebody else to help?
Yeah.
Instead of being the first one, stepping up. And, and obviously it's not a world-changing event, but it's like, that's who I want to be.
Yeah, that's who you want to be, but you're being the change that you want to see. When you say it's not a world-changing event, I think it's a little ripple in the universe. And can you imagine if everybody lived like that and created those little ripples together? They would have an exponential effect. I mean, I call that a 1%, right? That's a 1% thing that you did that day that, whether you did it or not, no one's going to really notice, but you do enough of that. You do a 1% like that every day, it's going to change who Fred Joyal is, what the power that Fred Joyal has in the world. And that's a beautiful thing. And you've systematized how to be bold in the book. You give people the tools, very much how we give people the tools on how to be more successful, however way they define success. So I think that's amazing. It's really a game of 1%, right? It's like, if you don't do that, no one's noticing. But when you do that, now you share the story with me, the story gets brought out into the world. It's just real. It just becomes who you are. It's almost like, we didn't talk a lot about brands here, but almost like your personal brand. Fred will empower you. He's a super nice guy. He'll go out of his way to make the world the place that he wants to see it to be. I think a lot more came out of that. I think that's an amazing story, but that person probably told that story to a few people, and I don't know, there's something special about it.
You hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, that young woman probably told about that. Can you believe what happened?
Yeah.
I was kind of stuck, I don't know what she was going to do. She may have had to skip the flight. I don't know. It could have been disastrous.
Right.
but yeah, it will reverberate with her, and people are going to hear that story and say, "Wow, I'd like to be that person,"
For sure.
like
For sure.
and that's a lot of it. Is like, but boldness isn't about drawing attention to yourself or being a show off. It's about being fully who you want to be. And it's a constant growth process for me. I find myself doing more and more of these things still. I'm constantly expanding my comfort zone and finding new things to be uncomfortable about.
For
Um,
sure. For sure.
but uh, Paul, I really appreciate this conversation and knowing you and getting to meet all of the dentists that you have an impact on by helping them realize their vision more boldly. And I think that's really what you do. Is you say, this is a lot bolder vision than you thought you could realize, and then you help them realize it, and all of a sudden they come back to you and say, my vision got bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
What's next? Help me figure out what's next.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
So
It's a lot of fun.
yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, I look forward to seeing you out on the road again. And thanks so much for doing this and talking about your business and your life and the impact boldness has had on your life.
Fred, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for sharing, decades of wisdom within the book and systematizing it. And I'm honored to call you a friend and a colleague, and look forward to our future adventures. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And to everyone listening, share this podcast if it meant something to you, and keep on becoming bolder.